I'm reading this morning from Luke 21. I'm not going to do the whole chapter because it's quite a long chapter and there's a lot to get through. But I am going to jump later on towards the end of Luke 21. So we'll do the first bit and then we'll jump straight to the end because it does tie. You'll see that it does make sense and they will link together somehow. So Luke 21, for now just verses 1 down to 9. Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box. And he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on." And while some were speaking of the temple, how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, he said, as for these things that you see, the days will come when there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And they asked him, "Teacher, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place?" And he said, "See that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and the time is at hand. Do not go after them. And when you hear of wars and tumults, do not be terrified. For these things must first take place, but the end will not be at once." Father God, we thank you for your word. Your word is truth and your word is life. And so we just pray, Lord God, that you speak to us this morning. You open our eyes, open our ears and our hearts, Lord, that we may receive what it is that you have to share this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. I felt it was right to preach on this topic. It's been something that's been on my mind quite a bit recently anyway, this theme that which we'll get into in a second. But I did feel it was right to talk on Luke 21. I mean, this account is recorded in all of the Gospels, actually. Matthew goes in a little bit more detail than Luke does. But I didn't want to go too much in depth into the end-time prophecy stuff because that's a very big topic and we'd be here for a long time. And that's not the main focus of what I'm talking about this morning. But I do feel that it's right to be talking about this because a lot has been happening in the world. A lot has been happening even in our own country, let alone across the water in the US or across the water in the rest of Europe, all the way over in the Middle East. A lot has been taking place this year. In fact, over the last several years, there have been a lot of things happening, moving into place that line up fascinatingly with biblical prophecy. It's phenomenal when you really look at the key players and the key events and things that are falling into place. It's fascinating, but it's also convicting as well. It is convicting, which is the point of my message. So I'm not going to jump ahead of where I'm going. But Luke 21, this account here is amazing for a few different reasons because it's got a lot of challenge in it and it's also got a lot of prophecy in it. It's not often when we think of end-time prophecy that we think of Jesus being one of those people giving us end-time prophecies. But he does. We often think of Revelation or Daniel or maybe a bit in Ezekiel. But we don't always sort of look to what Jesus says about to look for in those end days. He does give some signs that we should be looking for and preparing for. So it's not often that we go here. So it's quite interesting for that reason. But there's also a really difficult and I think uncomfortable challenge in Luke 21 that begins right at the beginning in verses 1 down to 4. And it says that Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box. And he saw a poor widow put in 2 small coins. Now, the chapter starts quite in a weird place. Given where the rest of the chapter goes, for a big chunk of the middle, Jesus begins talking about the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem. He's talking about end times and wars. But yet, this chapter begins with this very small snippet of his observation of this offering taking place. There's this crowd that's gathered, this queue to be given offering, putting their sacrifice, their tribute into the offering at the temple, which was customary. That was the thing that was to be done. It was more cultural than it was religious at this point. But it seems slightly out of place, what Jesus says here, compared to where the rest of this chapter goes. But he does tie it all up nicely at the end. But in the previous chapter, he's just finished chastising and criticizing the religious leaders and elite. So he's gone from condemning people to now commending somebody. There's a big shift here in the theme and in kind of the focus of what Jesus is talking about. But they are linked. And it is relevant, even though it might seem a little bit out of place. So he sees this crowd. And there's all of these rich people. They may not all be religious leaders. Most of these are probably just very wealthy individuals, wealthy men in the area, who are all gathering, putting their offering into the box or whatever it would have been in the temple at that time. And they're giving copious amounts, huge, vast amounts of money. That's really impressive. It looks great to people on the outside. Everybody looking from an outsider's perspective is thinking, wow, isn't that so generous? How awesome and wonderful. How good of this person. How kind to be given so much money. And then he sees this little old woman. I mean, it doesn't say that she's old. We just assume that she's old. But he sees this widow. She's got no husband. So she's got no income, no money to her name. And she's in this crowd, she's waiting in this queue, and she puts in 2 small coins. Now that small little snippet there, the 2 small, it says copper coins in the NIV, other translations put it as mites. Which, if you understand, a mite was basically, the best way we could understand it today, it was around about 1% of a daily wage. That's what a mite consisted of. That was really its value. It was pretty much valueless. That's the best way of explaining the amount of money that she had to her name. It had no real value. It had no real worth. It couldn't even buy her a loaf of bread. Probably couldn't even buy her a crumb of bread. It'd be the equivalent of a penny for us, if even that. So these 2 small coins, it was worthless in the eyes of the world, as far as monetary value was concerned. As far as possessions and things on the surface level were concerned, it was worthless. It had no value. But it's all she has. It's all she had. So it's significant for that reason, first of all. But then we read that she gives 2. She would have been completely justified in only giving 1 of those coins. She had every right to keep the 1 coin. If this is all she's got to her name, everyone would have thought, that's fine. You don't need to give any at all, let alone giving both of them. We understand. It's not going to be good for you to do that. It's going to put you out slightly. But instead, she gives all that she has. And Jesus responds and he says, truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. So we see the difference between her sacrifice and the sacrifice of the rich people. It was drastically different. On the outside, it looked like they were being generous, but in truth, they weren't. The money they were giving was of no consequence to them. There's no sacrifice in their giving whatsoever. The rich gave a lot because they could afford to give a lot. Without concern, hearing strange noises. Without concern, they could give vast amounts of money. It didn't really make a dent in their weekly wage or however much it was they were earning and how often it was they earned. It wasn't going to make that much of a difference. But 2 mites was all this widow had. And it was all she was willing to give anyway. So right off the bat, we go straight into this chapter with a real challenge from Jesus. Because sometimes we often wait to be in a certain position, a certain place or scenario or circumstance before we end up giving to God. Before we really put in our all and our effort and give any sacrifice to him. We can see, we know those areas in our lives where God is asking us to sacrifice. We know those areas. We know what he's calling us to, whatever that may be. It could be he's calling you to go and talk to a certain person. It could be he's praying for a certain person's situation. It could be literally giving money. It doesn't have to be giving money. Sacrifice and offering to God is not just giving money. You know those areas. But sometimes we often wait for the opportune time when it's best for me to do so, when it's comfortable for me to do so. It's very interesting. But you see, God is asking for us to give what we can here and now. He's asking for our obedience. Not in the future, not at a certain time, not when it benefits us to do so, or we feel ready, or we got the energy, or the willingness, or the heart, or whatever. He's asking for our sacrifice here and now. See, because God isn't concerned as much about the offering as much as he's concerned about the heart and the motive behind the offering, behind the giving. The quality and the condition is not the important bit. Because we do that, don't we? We compare ourselves and we compare our giving to other people. We compare our ministries to other people. We compare our praise to other people and our worship to other people. And go, oh yeah, no, but I can't be quite like them. And theirs is far more exuberant than mine. They're far more eloquent than I am when they pray. You know, they've got all of this anointing from God. I couldn't do it to God. So it's probably not worth me really trying because I couldn't do it justice. Not like they're doing it over there. They're giving more than me. I can't give that much. So what's the point? They've got the time, they've got the finances, the resources, the knowledge or whatever. It's not as good as theirs. It's not as impressive. Am I in the right place to be doing it? Am I in the right place to be sacrificing right now to God? You see, the whole point of sacrifice is that it's uncomfortable, is that it hurts, is that we don't benefit in the immediate from it. See, if there is no sacrifice in our giving, then it's an empty offering to God. That's the point that Jesus was making about these rich people. He said, yeah, they may be given vast amounts of money that looks wonderful, and it may be great for the temple. Yeah, wonderful that they can use that money to line their own pockets, and maybe put it towards some good to make it look like they're ticking their boxes. It may be beneficial in the immediate for those people, but before God, it's empty. He doesn't need their money. God's not out of change. He's not poor. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that, like in the previous chapter, as he was chastising the religious elite of the day, he's saying that these people, they're all talk, but there's nothing inside. They may look the part, they may act the part, they talk the part, they give so that they may look like they are holy, religious, wonderful men who love the Lord and want to give and give and give. But really inside they're dead, they're proud, they're arrogant and they're selfish. Don't be like them. I mean, sometimes we can be even like the pompous religious elite of Jesus' day. Peacocks who perform, getting ego boosts when we need it, maybe a bit of an adrenaline hit. We like the applause. We like someone saying, oh, well done. You did great. We're only human, but sometimes we've got to be careful. We've got to watch it. We've got to watch ourselves, especially those in ministry. We have to watch ourselves. It's too easy to go through the motions, to tick the boxes, to convince people. And really, inside, we're not really sacrificing or giving anything to God in our spare time. We look the part on a Sunday, and then the rest of the week, no one would even know. No one would know. They'd listen to the words that we use, the conversations that we have, the things that we look at, the things that we sing about, and they'd go, that person? Christian? You're telling me that person I saw on the Sunday, and yet they're a drastically different human being on the Monday. See, anyone can give when it's in their best interest to do so. When we're in a position to give, anyone can do that at any time. When I have the capacity, when I have the energy, when I have the time, when I have the willingness, when I have the finances to do so. Anyone can give in that scenario. Anybody can. But to sacrifice is to give when it hurts to do so. I mean, this goes right the way back to the beginning with Cain and Abel. This was what Cain couldn't understand and grasp. It wasn't about the offering itself. It was about the heart and the motive behind the offering that his brother gave. His brother gave the best that he had, which was risky. He didn't know whether the next load of crop was going to be that good. It could have all failed after the first crop that he gave. But he didn't care. He knew God was worth it. Cain couldn't get it. He couldn't understand it. Jesus talks about the cost of following him in Luke 9, and there's all of those who say, oh, I'll follow you, Lord, but first let me go and do this. First I've got to get my affairs in order, sort this out, prepare this, whatever. I've got to go and bury my father. I've got to go and sort the field out. Let me go say goodbye to my family. And Jesus says, if you're not willing to put your hand to the plow and never look back, don't follow. Don't follow. David Guzik puts it like this. He says that Jesus' principle here shows us that before God, the spirit of giving determines the value of the gift more than the amount. God doesn't want grudgingly given money or guilty money. God loves the cheerful giver. And again, this isn't just about money. It's about anything that we do as an offering to God, as a sacrifice to him. If we're doing it with a begrudging attitude, don't bother. Don't bother. So remember what King David says. He refused to give to God that which cost me nothing. That which cost me nothing. Not only is this a challenge, but it's also encouraging. Because just as Jesus saw this widow's offering, he sees our offering too. He sees us. He does see our heart. And he does see our motive. And though that can be a challenge at times, that can also be an encouragement to us. That when we feel like, I've not got much to offer, I'm not as great as that person over there, I'm not as successful as that one over there, or what I have to give and what I have to say and what I have to do isn't quite as extravagant as somebody else's over here. It doesn't matter. God sees your heart. God sees your willingness. He sees your sacrifice. And he's pleased by it. Pleased by it more than he's pleased by those who give much. Give because you want to. Sacrifice because you want to. Follow because you want to. Obey because you want to. Don't worry about how it looks to other people. Don't worry about how it sounds to other people. Don't worry about what other people think about whether this is the right thing for you to be doing in this moment or not. Whether they think that, oh, maybe you should wait. Just give. Just follow. Just obey him. He sees. He saw the widow's offering and he valued it very much. So there's a challenge first and foremost that we start this chapter with. And then it goes straight into, in verses 5 down towards 9, something that seems rather off topic. It suddenly drastically changes its tune and its theme. And Jesus, it begins with, and while some were speaking of the temple, how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, he said, as for these things that you see, the days will come when there will not be here one stone left upon another that will not be thrown down. Now, it seems a little bit of a random shift, this, from what we were just talking about. But notice again the theme. What were the people doing? They were being distracted. They were distracted and concerned about the wrong thing. Their hearts and their minds were in the wrong place. Just as those who were focused on the amount that the rich people were giving, they were distracted by the wrong thing. They still ain't getting it. They're still not getting it. And Jesus responds with something so radical and controversial for the day that he says, yes, this amazing, beautiful, vast structure that you're looking at, that you're marveling at, because it's the pinnacle of Jewish culture. It's the pinnacle of our faith, the dwelling place of God. This huge thing is just a building. And guess what? In 40 years' time, this building's going to be torn down and there's going to be nothing left. That's radical and controversial for the day. This is the new temple. This was now bigger, grander than the old temple of Solomon. Herod at this point, he's made the grounds, it's around about 30, it started at about 14 hectares, and then it went up to around about 36-ish hectares. That's massive. Massive amount of land. It's a vast, vast building. If you know the history of the temple, the first one was destroyed by the Babylonians. There was a smaller one that was rebuilt, and then Herod then makes it much bigger, much grander. It was, the building itself was 1,000 square feet by 1,000 square feet. It's huge. It was then adorned, the historian Josephus talks about the fact that the temple itself was adorned in gold and in white, and at certain times of the day you couldn't even look in the direction of the building because the sun would reflect so brightly that it would blind you. So you couldn't even look at it at the early and late hours of the day. It was also customary at this time to swear by the temple. The temple itself had become the idol. So to speak against the temple was blasphemy to the eyes of the religious Jew in that day. So Jesus is being very controversial here. He's saying, don't worry about the temple. He said, that don't really matter. He said, that's just a building. Don't put your hope and all your trust and your focus on that. He said, it's not going to be here much longer. It's not going to be here much longer. You can understand why the religious elite hated him so much. He did everything to rile them up and ruffle their feathers. And I'm so glad. But you see, they'd missed the point. They'd missed the point. See, he's already been criticizing the religious leaders. Everything that looked good on the outside, but was dead on the inside. It was empty, void on the inside. See, the temple was no longer the Holy of Holies. This was no longer the dwelling place of God. The temple had already been desecrated before. The Ark of the Covenant wasn't even there. They worshipped the building. They worshipped its history. They worshipped the idea of this temple. It was idolatry. It was idolatry. On the outside, it looked good. It was convincing, just like the religious leaders. And it's easy to be lured in by something that is appealing on the outside, but it's the inside that matters. What's going on in the heart of that person, or in the heart of that situation, or the heart of that place, or whatever it is. And this again applies to us today. How easily are we led down those paths? Whether it's religious things, whether it's we're led down certain ministries or certain leaders and teachers, and we begin to, put on pedestals as if they're almost on the same level of Christ. We see that happening a lot. Whether it's politicians and political parties that we begin to follow down, and suddenly they become our only focus and our only source of hope. And you think, whoa, hang on a second. Let's get our priorities straight here. And so they asked him, when will these things take place? When is this going to happen? How will we see the signs, Jesus? See, they want to know the day and the hour. They want to be prepared. They want to get their affairs in order. And the best way to do that is to know exactly when it's going to happen. So I can do what I want to do, live as I need to live, and get serious when it gets closer to the day. That's when I get serious about prayer. That's when I get serious about ministry. That's when I get serious about evangelism. That's when I get serious about this or serious about whatever. towards the end, when I see the day approaching me, I need to know the when, the hows, and the whos. And that can be the same for if we're wanting God to tell us and show us where we should be going, if we're thinking that maybe God's calling us down a certain path, and we're waiting for all of that specific information, all of those details about when God, where God, how God, who God, all of this sort of stuff, we're never going to move. We're never going to move. Requires faith. Requires sacrifice here and now. Living like it could happen at any moment. Could be around the corner. Only God knows. We want to get our affairs in order right at the last moment. That's when I want to get serious. But right now, I'm happy being distracted and dabbling in the world and worrying about what the world says to worry about, being concerned about what the television tells me to be concerned about, and letting that rule my life. I know somebody who's admitted to not turning up to any of their worship evenings and their prayer meetings and so on because he's been so upset and angry by the politics and everything going on in America. I thought, you what? You think that's a good enough reason to refuse to be with the people of God and giving him glory and praise and honor and thanks? Mind in the wrong place. Heart in the wrong place. Not looking at the right things. Not focusing on the right person, on the right one. And Jesus answers them, but not in a way that they expect. They want to know the day and the hour. But Jesus gives them a little bit of a different, more cryptic answer instead. And he says, see that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name saying, I am he, and the time is at hand. Do not go after them. His answer just goes straight in with a warning to his people, to those who are listening. And it seems a little bit unrelated, but it's not an unrelated answer. See, Jesus understood that this temple had become an idol of its own. It basically replaced actually God at this point. The religion itself, rituals, customs, practices, all of this had become the focus and the thing that they worshipped more than the God himself. I mean, remember, sometimes even a good thing can become an idol. Even a good thing can become an idol. And that means sometimes God has to sour and take away that which is good in our lives because it's for our own benefit. Then maybe we cling too closely to it rather than clinging to him. We trust too much in that thing and not trusting in him. We look to that thing or whatever it is, that person, for our advice, our counseling, our guidance, everything, and not him. So a good thing can become an idol too. It's exactly what happened with the temple. It's exactly what happened here. But the theme, be weary of distraction. Don't let it take you off course. Don't let it take you off course. Jesus says, see that you are not led astray. And that's an important command. That's an important warning from Jesus that I think we often overlook, should I say. What they didn't realize at the time was everything that Jesus was talking about, and in the few verses that go on as well, everything that Jesus was going to be saying here was prophetic. He was going to be prophesying the destruction of the temple. He was going to prophesy the destruction of Jerusalem as a whole, which coincides with the destruction of the temple. And then he even goes on to prophesy about the future that they wouldn't even see, that they wouldn't even live through, ready for his second coming. Not that they understood that at the time. Not even the disciples or the apostles quite grasped that it wasn't going to be in their time either. But guess what? They lived as though it would be. They gave and sacrificed as though it was going to be in their time. As if at any second now, it could happen. He'll return. How is he going to find me? How will he find me? Worrying, fearing, panicking, complaining about the world with the world? Or is he going to find me busy? Busy doing his work? There's a difference between being busy and being a busybody, I heard recently. And I thought, that's quite true. I like that. And I thought that, I liked it and I didn't like it because it certainly challenged me. And I thought, that's me summed up. I can go, oh yeah, I'm really busy. But it's like, actually, I'm just filling myself with busyness that really isn't that important. And then I'm getting stressed about it, going, I've got no time to do the things that I should be doing. And really, I'm just filling my life with nonsense. I'm thinking, hang on a second, Josh. Maybe we need to take a step back. Maybe we need to reevaluate things here. Prioritize. They didn't realize what Jesus was talking about was prophetic. In the meantime, in the time leading up to the destruction of the temple, and even after, there were going to be plenty of distractions. Plenty of things that were going to test their faith, that was going to take them off course, that would make any normal person fall apart and despair. There were going to be conflicts, a lot of conflicts. The Roman Empire got to a point in the Middle East where they were just done with the Middle East, and they were just going to destroy everything and everyone in their path, including the Jews. They were kind of their main target, really. And in 70 AD, they utterly level the entirety of Jerusalem. Tear down the temple, slaughter people in their thousands, and they send the people fleeing. And they never return until the 1940s. So a long time. So there's a lot of distraction in this period that they didn't realize Jesus was warning them about. Conflicts. There were going to be famines. There's going to be persecution. There are going to be politicians and military leaders who rise up who are going to distract you. And you're going to put all your focus onto that issue over there. People who are going to come along claiming to be a hero, claiming to be a messiah in their own right. Saying, I've got the solution. I have the answers. Put your trust in me. Follow me. Follow this plan. Follow this scheme. This whatever. Saying, I am he. The time is at hand. But Jesus says, do not go after them. Do not go after them. It never ceases to amaze me at the minute just how many Christians are so afraid. So afraid of what's going on around us. And it's human to be afraid. It's human to be afraid. But we are given a spirit of confidence, a spirit of boldness, a spirit of assurance. We are not given a spirit of fear. What does Hebrews teach us? That the Lord is my helper. He is my helper. We fear nothing. Certainly not what goes on in politics or in the environment around us or whatever else goes on in our own lives and in our personal situations. Just as Jesus was warning the people then, he warns us now, be careful that you do not get distracted by these things and they fill you with fear and they make you immobile. We have a mission. We have a calling as Christians. Each and every one of us have a calling. We've all been given that same mission, the Great Commission. To preach the gospel. To speak to those who are lost and hurting and in need of hope, in need of an answer, a solution. Because they are living in fear because of everything that they see around them. Why? Because they don't have a hope. We do. We know how it all ends. We've got it all written for us. When we fear as Christians and we're gripped by fear, not just being afraid is a different thing. That's a human emotion, and we will be afraid in certain situations from time to time. Just as Christians who go through persecution and are being massacred, I'm sure that they have fear in their heart as they're facing the machete or the gun or whatever it is that's going to bring an end to their earthly life. But that's not the same as being gripped by fear, living in fear, and letting that rule you and control you. Motivate and infiltrate your conversations and steer your conversations with people around you. There's a difference. When we live like that, all it shows and exposes really is our lack of faith in him. Our lack of faith and trust in his word. He goes on, and we won't have time to go into the other parts afterwards, but he goes on and he talks about nations rising against nations. There'll be wars, there'll be rumors of wars, there'll be famines. But he says, don't worry. Don't be afraid of these things. Don't be distressed. Don't be alarmed. And we shouldn't be. He tells us all of this is going to happen. We shouldn't be surprised. I always remember in Daniel 10, when the angel finally reaches Daniel, and he's been waiting for 3 weeks for an answer. 3 weeks he's been waiting. And this angel comes and he says, I'm sorry, I was held up. I was delayed by the prince of Persia. Other translations put it as the spirit of the prince of Persia. Something that we often forget as Christians is that we do not live in a world that is just flesh and blood. And we do not fight and battle against flesh and blood. What goes on in the world, politics, wars, whatever, there is a greater power at play. There is a greater battle going on that we cannot see, that we could not even begin to comprehend. Just as it was in Daniel's day, just as when Satan offers and tries to tempt Jesus by saying, I'll give you all of these kingdoms. And you go, well, how are they his to give? He's not talking about sovereignty of the world, but he's talking about influence over the hearts of men. And what I see in a lot of Christians today is a lot of hatred of human beings because of the decisions and the things that they say, which is the most un-Christian thing you could possibly do. I've even seen Christians commenting online about politicians and so on, saying some of the most heinous and vile things, claiming to be a follower of Christ, and then talking about all sorts of things about somebody and so over in whatever country. I'm thinking, careful. Careful. This all applies to us today. Jesus then goes on and he says, when you hear of wars and tumults, do not be terrified. For these things must first take place, but the end will not be at once. It can be so easy to get bogged down and confused and distracted by everything else that our offering and our sacrifice to God disappears. Where we can resort to just living in fear, living in anxiety and worry and concern, engaging in grumbling and complaining with other people around us. It's bad enough when Christians sit around and grumble all the time, but you can guarantee that means we're also sitting around and grumbling with everybody else too. We're supposed to be offering hope, a solution, an answer to their concerns and to their worries. It's too easy. It was the same problem back then. It was the same problem. Jesus ends the chapter, jumping right to the end of this chapter, by talking about the fig tree. And he says that this fig tree, it will show you the signs of the season. It's like any plant, where we've now entered into spring. How do we know it's spring? Look outside. Look at what nature's doing. It's a sign of the season. It's exactly what Jesus is talking about here. He says, don't get bogged down by these things, and also don't obsess over these things. It's easy to also obsess over biblical prophecy, and obsess over end time prophecy, and obsess looking at the signs. And he says, don't obsess over these things, but be aware. Be vigilant. Look out for these things. In the ancient world, and certainly in ancient Israel, we're going way back ancient Israel as well, in the Old Testament, you had watchmen who would stand on the walls to make sure that the city was not caught unaware and unprepared when the day of war approached them. They would see everything from miles and miles around them. And if one thing looked out of place, if one thing was suspicious, they'd report back. And the king knew, get ready, be prepared, because something may be coming. They didn't know for sure, but they thought, nonetheless, let's be ready. And it's exactly what Jesus is saying here. And he finishes it off again with one last command. Watch yourselves. Watch yourselves. Don't be distressed. Don't be distracted by things that need to happen and take place. Don't be caught off guard. Don't be caught unaware. Look for the season like that fig tree. Don't obsess. But be vigilant, be aware, be weary. And when you see these things taking place in the world and in your own life, when you see these things take place, don't be afraid. I remember when he talks to Paul, when Paul's gone to Corinth, and Paul's had a pretty rough time of it at this point. He's gone from place to place to place where he's being chased out of them all. They've been trying to kill him, they've been mocking him, they've been hating and insulting him, and he's at a pretty low point. This is Paul here, and he's depressed, and he is afraid, the Bible tells us. This is Paul, afraid at this moment. And then God speaks to him in the night, and he says, do not be afraid. And then he gives him another command. Do not stop preaching. Do not stop preaching. I will be with you. That promise is there for us today. And we have to ask ourselves, what will I be found doing? How will I be found on that day? When and where that day may come? How will I be found? Will I be found fearing like the rest of the world? Distracted and not doing what I should be doing because I'm filled with fear like Paul? So much so that I've ceased doing what I was called to do. Or will I be found fulfilling that command? Will I be found trusting, hoping in him and him alone? Will I be found trusting in his word and in his promise? Will I be found busy or being a busybody? Am I giving my all like that woman? See the link here? All of these things were going to take place, and all of these things will continue to take place in our lifetime and possibly beyond. Who knows? But just like that woman, don't be distracted. Give all that you can. Give all that you have to him, because he's worthy. He deserves it. Are we giving our all to him today? Am I waiting for that last opportune moment to get serious about whatever it is that I know he's calling me to? Whether it's preaching to that person, evangelizing to that group over there, whether it's praying for that individual that I don't want to pray for because I don't trust them or I don't forgive them or whatever. You know what that is, what that area is in your life. You know what you're being called to sacrifice. Are you waiting for the opportune time? Are you waiting for the right moment when it's in your best interest to do so? When it's comfortable? When it's safe? When it's easy? Be like that widow who says, it's all I've got. I'm going to give it all anyway. How will we be found on that day? Amen.